Stay connected to your community and save. Just 99 cents a month gets you 3 months of unlimited access to Inform.com. Visit Inform.com/subscribe and get your first 3 months of news for only 99 cents a month.
The first American killed in the Vietnam War was born in Minnesota and died while watching a movie. This is Tracy Briggs. Welcome to this week's Back Then. Chester Chet Ovnand certainly had nothing to prove. In 1958, at the age of 44, he had retired from the Army after proudly serving in both World War II and Korea. He was living a comfortable life in Copperas Cove, Texas, when something called to him from Vietnam. Before he was a Texas man, Chet was the Minnesota-born son of a Norwegian-born carpenter. Perhaps it was his Scandinavian sense of responsibility, but Ovnand had to be part of the fight in Vietnam. It would eventually lead to tragic consequences, but also his place in history as the first American casualty of the Vietnam War. While some middle-aged men decided Vietnam was a young man's battle, Ovnand opted to rejoin the Army. He was assigned to an 8-man American Military Assistance Advisory Group sent to train South Vietnamese troops. He was stationed at a base camp 20 miles northeast of Saigon, where trouble was brewing. In a 1984 interview with People magazine, his wife Mildred said despite her husband voluntarily serving in Vietnam, he was still homesick and looking forward to coming home soon. With every letter he wrote to her, he would count down the days. On July 8, 1959, with 115 days left in his deployment, Ovnand dropped a letter in the mess hall mailbox. It would be his last. According to a Time magazine report from that night, after mailing the letter, Ovnand and 5 others sat down in the gray stucco mess hall to watch a movie, The Tattered Dress starring Gene Crane. They set up the movie projector and settled in for a night that perhaps made them feel just a little closer to home. But they'd only make it to intermission. This is how Time reported what happened next. While they were absorbed in the first reel of the movie, 6 communist terrorists, who obviously had cased the place well, crept out of the darkness and surrounded the mess hall. 2 positioned a French Mat submachine gun in the rear window. 2 pushed gun muzzles through the pantry screen. The other 2 went to the front of the building to cover the Vietnamese guard. When Sergeant Ovnand snapped on the lights to change the first reel of the movie, the terrorists opened fire. Ovnand and Major Dale Bice of Imperial Beach, California, fell and died within minutes of each other and became the first U.S. soldiers to die in combat in Vietnam. It's not clear who actually died first, so they are both credited as the first. Captain Howard Boston of Blairsburg, Iowa, was seriously wounded, and 2 Vietnamese guards were killed. Within minutes, Vietnamese troops arrived, but the rest of the assassins had already fled. Major Jack Hellett of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, escaped without injury, while 2 other officers in the unit were also safe, having chosen that night to play tennis on the base instead of watching that movie. Who exactly was Chester Ovnand? While official military records of Ovnand list his home state as Texas, Ovnand began life in Minnesota. He was born to Ingebret, Bert, and Mabel Ovnand in Thief River Falls. When Chet was 6 years old in 1920, the family, which now included younger sister Furley, moved to Adams, North Dakota, where Bert worked as a carpenter. Following his parents' divorce, Ovnand and his sister moved to Mankato, Minnesota with their mother, who, by 1930, had remarried. In 1937, Ovnand married Catherine Reynard. The couple would later divorce. When World War II broke out, Ovnand was working in retail. He enlisted in the Army in Milwaukee in 1942. Following his service in World War II from 1942 to 1945, he later served in the Korean War from 1950 to 53. During his time in service and after his death in Vietnam, Ovnand received several commendations and medals, including the Purple Heart, National Defense Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, Army Presidential Unit Citation, Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Army Good Conduct Medal. And to further honor him, a street in Fort Hood, Texas, was also renamed Ovnand Boulevard. All of it was little consolation to his wife, who learned about her husband's death while sipping coffee and watching the Today Show. She later told People magazine, "I miss him every day. I just regret the whole damn war. I hated every minute of it." Mildred died in 1987, just 5 years after her husband had the distinction of being just the second name of 58,000 total inscribed on the Vietnam Wall. Bice is the first because names are first listed according to chronological date of death and next alphabetically. However, Ovnand's name is actually inscribed twice on the wall because it's misspelled on that first panel. They spelled it Ovnard instead of Ovnand. But authorities remedied the mistake by inscribing it on a later panel. A note about the origin of this story. Earlier this fall, the Veterans Honor Flight of North Dakota and Minnesota marked an important milestone. For the first time in the history of the program, the majority of travelers were veterans of the Vietnam War, rather than the Korean War and World War II. So as a way to honor those Vietnam veterans, I chose to write stories about the first North Dakotan and the first Minnesotan to die in the Vietnam War. But after those stories ran, I received an email from a reader who said he certainly didn't want to take away from the sacrifice of either of those men I wrote about, but he wanted to point out that Chester Ovnand, who was the first American killed in the Vietnam War, was actually from Minnesota. So I do appreciate that he sent me that email. And of course, I would love to hear from anybody else that has ideas for stories, or if you think I need a correction, or if there's any other follow-up stories you want me to do. Boy, I'd love to hear from you. So just shoot me an email at tracy.briggs@formcom.com, and we'll see if we can do some more stories on Back Then. So thanks for joining us on Back Then. Hope you tune in next week.
Get reliable and accurate local news with Inform.com. Inform.com is your trusted local news source with journalists dedicated to keeping you informed about what's happening in your community. Visit Inform.com now.